Some of you who've been talking share either some of the events you came up with or some of the words that you used. Anybody wants to yell one out?
Arab Spring.
Arab Spring?
Narcissistic.
Narcissistic?
Yay! That's a word.
Thank you. Yeah, I figured that was a word, not an event. Although for some people it is an event.
You are.
Any other events? We already said the Occupy movement.
The anime convention.
Anime convention.
The election of Naheed Nemchi as mayor of Calgary.
Calgary mayor, okay.
The new premier of Alberta.
Yep.
And the new leader of the opposition.
Like to love the mayor of
The Middle East.
Middle East, yeah. Someone said that? And I mentioned already the Occupy Wall Street movement.
Yeah. What about the London riots?
London riots, thank you.
Kids.
Kids?
Yeah.
That's a word.
That's
Not,
a word.
that's not an event.
Yeah.
It depends. It could be an event too. No, I mean, we're doing both. I was just sort of laughing because sometimes a kid is an event. Yeah, okay, so far for words, we have narcissistic and kids. How about some more words?
Shallow.
Shallow.
Waste of time.
Say that again?
Waste of time.
Waste of time. Okay, thank you.
Over here. Liberty.
Liberty. Okay, thank you, Kevin. Other words?
Alternative.
Alternative. That's a good one. Thanks, Hopa.
Networking.
Networking. Okay.
Tension.
Tension?
Well, just between the two camps.
Oh, I see. Okay. So far for words, we have narcissistic, kids, shallow, waste of time, liberty, alternative, networking, tension between camps. Anybody want anything that's not really addressed in those? I'm going to add one, and it's the word fast. Okay? Instant, yeah. Say it again?
Expedient.
Expedient. See, that's a much nicer word. Thank you. Classing it up a little. Anyone else want to add a word or an event that we haven't already gotten to? Obama election. I think we've talked about elections in Alberta, but I'm going to add that. There's some.
Discarnate.
Say it again.
Discarnate.
Discarnate. Okay, that's for a word. Thank you, David. And Nick gives you a point for that.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to come back to this list at the end, just to see if our conversation... Yeah, Don?
Well, we had a disagreement about what the word would be. We both agree
Yeah?
that the word, that there's one concept, but two words. One word is networking and the other is bullshit.
Networking, and beside that, I'll add bullshit. Okay, thank you. You can censor that.
Jeez, you know the student who's over there in the corner is left. Maybe drove her away.
Yeah, well, that may be. Okay, but I just kind of wanted to get that going. First of all, to see where we were at, and this gives me a pretty clear picture. But what I'd like to do now, in the little short time that I'll talk before I open this up for conversation again, is to just put forward some events, and most of them you've already mentioned. I'm going to talk a little about Arab Spring. I'm going to talk about the London riots, about the Occupy movement, including the one in Edmonton, political campaigns, especially Obama. And then there's a book that was recommended to me by our illustrious friend Don Carmichael called Here Comes Everybody. And the subtitle is The Power of Organizing Without Organizing. And it's by Clay Shirky. So there's a few observations in this book as well that I want to bring forward. And I think, or at least I hope, that in some of these examples and the questions that are raised by them, it will give us enough fodder to continue the discussion about what role social media is having in politics. Because I think if you were to ask me the, short answer to the question that's our topic today, is social networking creating a new politics? Yep, it is. And you can ignore that or not, but I think I found a quote that perfectly assesses how I feel, and it says, "We are well beyond being able to consider social media a fad. And this is by the person who worked on Obama's social media campaign. If you're not open to social media spaces, then you're not attuned to the dynamics on the street, and you sacrifice both understanding and power. Bum, bum, bum. Now, I know many of you may disagree with that, and that's okay. We can discuss that later. But I definitely think you can't ignore the fact that social media is playing a role in politics. And to me, the more interesting question for this cafe is, what role is it playing in politics, and to what effect? So maybe we could stop the conversation just from saying yes or no, and with some of these examples, let's move forward and see if we can problematize this a little bit. Another quote from the New York Times this past September said that, this goes to one of the words we already had, citizens of all ages, but particularly the young, and I believe your word was kids, are rejecting conventional structures like parties and trade unions in favor of what they perceive as a less hierarchical and more participatory system in the culture of social media. So they view it as more participatory and less hierarchical, and they're becoming more hostile toward traditional institutions. And what the other point this article is trying to make is some of these new social technology tools that we have, things like Wiki and social networking, Twitter, donations that you can instantly get on PayPal, makes any coalition of like-minded people instantly viable. Whereas in the past, that might have been much more difficult to get momentum going. Now, all you have to do is gather a group of people, put up a PayPal site, and boom, you're on your way. And certainly, I think the word kids or youth, I'm not a kid. I think once you're over 40, you're not a kid, right? That's something key to look at in this movement. Okay, now to the Arab Spring. This is an interesting example because widely it's been credited in news agencies that social technology was one of the driving forces in the Arab Spring. And before I looked into this, I thought so too. But here's two interesting facts for you. Number one, Mark Zuckerberg, who is the creator of Facebook, he said, I think Facebook was neither necessary nor sufficient for the Arab Spring to happen. He said, brave people were responsible for the revolutionary actions. This is the guy, this is the creator of Facebook, and you would think he'd want to take credit for this, but he's not. He's saying, no, this was brave people. Here's another interesting fact. If you look at the penetration of Facebook in Arab countries, it's less than 4% in Libya, 5% in Egypt, and 17% in Tunisia. So it's clear that while Facebook and some of these social technologies may have helped to mobilize this core group, that something beyond that was happening in the Arab Spring. And another thing that I read said that word of mouth and Al Jazeera television actually played a much larger role than Facebook did in the Arab Spring. So there's one interesting fact. There's a young graduate student at Yale who studies political philosophy who wrote a paper about the Arab Spring and the role of social technology. And what he was writing about the day that they shut down, it was January 28th, they shut down cell phone usage and shut down, I believe they shut down the internet. So they thought, okay, this is going to help us quell this movement if we shut down. But actually, this student's paper proves that after January 28th, the movement became more diffuse. It was spread over more parts. It became, instead of one isolated movement in Tahrir Square, it spread. And all these people were having face-to-face conversations, and this was moving much broader. So this student would argue, no, in fact, when you shut down social media, the movement just increased. So while it may have had some impact, I think what's interesting is it's probably less than people are crediting it for. So I'll leave that example, and we can talk about that later. But that sort of surprised me when I realized how low the penetration of Facebook is in these countries. You can't say, oh yeah, it's all because of Facebook that Arab Spring happened. No, it's not. Here's the other side. of social technology. And here's the example of the London riots. There were two men, and this was a groundbreaking case. Two men were given 4 years in jail because of their role inciting riot activity on Facebook. 4 years in jail. So here's the other side of social technology and politics. Just as easy as it is for people to connect with each other and say, let's go riot, it's easy for the police and other law enforcement agencies to monitor what's going on and to use that as their source of information. Oh, look, the riot's going to go down here now. Let's go see what's going to happen. I mean, you can't post an event on Facebook, let's go start a riot, and not expect the police to show up. Or maybe if they're not on Facebook. But the other thing is, the Vancouver riots. Suddenly, people who are doing these crazy things, it's like, uh-oh, someone caught me on YouTube, and now I'm going to jail. Everybody's laughing. But that happens. Everybody's got a camera phone. Everybody's got, whatever. And you're breaking the law. Suddenly, these social technology things can be the basis for punishment in ways that was not possible even 10 years ago. So that's another side to think about. I think another important question that we should consider when we think about the Arab Spring, when they shut down the social technology sites, and it is true that the police in London considered shutting down Twitter at the height of some of these uprisings with a massive backlash from civil liberty groups, and said you can't do this, that you're limiting freedom to dissent. You're limiting our freedom of speech. So to me, I think that's another big question that we can sort of put on the table and come back to. What is the role of social technology in creating new kinds of punishment and new kinds of dissent? Are we going to reach a point where these organizations like Google and Twitter and Facebook suddenly become the police for political debate, for dissent? What role are they going to have in keeping this kind of stuff going? That's another question. Well, I'm going to turn now to another example, which is the Occupy movement. And in true social technology fashion, I had sent some tweets, that's Twitter, to a couple of the organizers of the Edmonton Occupy movement, because I said, hey, I'm doing this talk on social technology, and I thought, what better way to meet them than on Twitter? And I've been exchanging notes with someone from the Occupy Edmonton movement, and she told me that they have 2 Facebook pages with over 1,000 users and 684 followers on Twitter. And I asked her, so what are you using Twitter for? And my thought before I did this was, well, they must be using it to organize. They must be using it to say, okay, we're going to meet tonight at 8 o'clock at, Steeps or whatever. They are doing that to some degree, but if you go under the Occupy YEG, which is the hashtag on Twitter for this movement, they're using it for a lot more than that. They're posting news articles, information articles about some of the issues that they're concerned about. They're posting links to New York Times articles about Occupy Wall Street. They're posting links to articles about corporate greed. They're posting pictures of what their camp looks like. They're posting videos. I took a tour of their camp on the video. I mean, I haven't actually been there. But this is all available on Twitter. And I think they're also, many of them, when they when they're tweeting something, also use the hashtag for the general Occupy movement, which now has come to, I read just the other day, 1,300 different cities, which is probably more already. And they're using social networking sites like Meetup, which is a way to connect with other people to plan events and get things going. So that's just a really quick overview. But what I think is most interesting about this Occupy movement, a lot of people would say that the more you have at stake, in fact, our recent Augustana Distinguished Lecture speaker, Professor Sajou, said the same thing. He said in communities where there's more at stake, they are using these tools of social technology to greater effect. And some have said, and when I say some, I mean I'm quoting The Economist, so this is not a disreputable source. The Economist said, well, it depends on who you ask. I'm just saying it's not someone's Twitter page. The Economist says that this Occupy movement might be the first genuine social media uprising in North America. Because up to now, people have used social media to do things like flash mobs, we're all going to dance in the mall or, whatever. And it hasn't really, and you think, if you can get 200 people to come to West Edmonton Mall and do a flash mob dance, why can't we get people to mobilize around issues that we care about? Around issues of life and death, around issues of poverty and climate change. So some would say this Occupy movement is finally North America getting on the bandwagon for what countries with much more at stake already know. That you can use social media for a genuine political effect in an uprising. Whether you agree with that or not, that's another story. Okay, I'm just throwing a lot of examples at you, but I'm almost done. Political campaigns. Some would say Obama's political campaign was one of the first to use social media to great effect. And I'm just going to give you some numbers. They had 13 million people on their email list for the Obama campaign. They had 3 million online donors. They had more than 5 million friends on 15 different social networking sites. They had 8.5 million visitors every month to their website. They had 70,000 different fundraising hubs that raised more than $30 million. They had 2,000 YouTube videos that were official, but they also had, and I think this is more significant, 442,000 YouTube videos that were generated by users who wanted to support the campaign. And I don't know how many of you have seen the Yes We Can videos on YouTube by the Obama campaign, but it's worth a look. If you haven't. 3 million people in the Obama campaign signed up for text messaging, and they received between 5 and 20 text messages a month. You might say, the Globe and Mail said that the first social media election in Canada took place last spring. And they said, show me a candidate who knows how to use social technology, and I'll show you a candidate who wins. Okay. Another way that social technology is being used in campaigns. Instead of traditional polling, where they go out and poll people, they're using Twitter to track real-time people's responses to candidates, to events, to issues. Anybody who Twitters and uses the hashtag that denotes the subject of that person's campaign, that'll show up in anybody who looks under that candidate's name. So suddenly, it really matters what people are saying about you on Twitter. And this, in this book that I mentioned, this has been used in terms of corporations and being called to responsibility. There's an example in this book where one of the banks, I think it was HSBC or something like that, had advertised this deal for students and then went back on it. And the students kicked up a Facebook page, a Twitter campaign, blog posts, social media slam, to the point where the bank had to rescind and go back to what they originally said they were going to do. And this is an example of the way social media can be used to put pressure on corporations. To say, we're going to call you to account because you said you were going to do this and you didn't. And now corporations are hiring people to watch their presence on social media. It's like, someone types in their Twitter, Air Canada sucks because their luggage got lost or whatever. Well, that's one person. But if you get 100 people from one flight all doing the same thing, okay, so momentum starts to grow. So that's another issue. Let's see, I'm just going to cut to maybe one more thing here. I think that's a pro of social media, is this ability to do things quickly, to gather groups together who might not otherwise be together. But here's the con. If it's that easy to organize a group for action, who gets to decide what's a worthy action? Because you might look at some of the things that are organized on Twitter or on Facebook and say, well, that's not worth protesting, or that's not worth whatever. But who gets to police that? Who gets to decide what's worth organizing for? The example that that book starts with is a lost cell phone. And this girl had left her cell phone in a cab, and someone else stole it. And because this person started posting pictures, she figured out who stole her phone. And she went to the police and said, hey, this person stole my phone. And the police said, well, it's just considered lost property. We can't consider it stolen property. Well, this girl's boyfriend, or I think it was her fiance, started a blog and started this like massive smear campaign against the New York City police. And the girl who stole the phone was arrested. She got her phone back. But this turned into, it got national news attention, partly because everybody could relate. Like, yeah, man, my phone, her phone was stolen. They should get her phone back. Why aren't they doing it? And it just became this groundswell. Okay, so that's for a lost phone. Is that worth it? What else are we organizing for? What are we using this power for? Because there's an enormous potential in some of these tools, but the question is, how do we use it, and who gets to decide what's okay and what's not, and what's worthy of attention? I'm going to leave you with one last example from that same book, and it's about some things that happened in Belarus. And there were some gatherings that people organized on Facebook to protest the increasingly unchecked power of Lukashenko and the allegations of this vote being rigged. Well, they were too terrified to do something more overt. So they arranged on Twitter to have these kind of flash mobs where everyone would meet in this one square in Minsk and clap. And that's all they were doing. They were just clapping. And then another time, they were all going to eat ice cream. And another time, they were just going to smile. And the police started arresting people for smile. This is an example. They were arresting people because, and here's what the book says, because any coordinated public gathering in that environment was political. Even if you're eating ice cream. Because the evidence that the youth of Belarus were operating in any organized way was a massive threat to the state. So even if all you're doing is coming together in the square and clapping and smiling and eating ice cream, you are a massive threat to the state. Because it's evidence that people are talking. And this is something else that he points out in this book. The power of social media is simply this. When everybody knows that everybody else knows. It's one thing when you're sitting at home thinking, boy, this government is corrupt. Man, I am suffering under this government. But what is the power then when you know that somebody else knows, and somebody else knows, and somebody else knows? Suddenly, your ability to want to take action, because you know everybody knows. Your ability, it's like you have a little more boldness to take action when everybody knows that everybody knows. That gives you a kind of courage that you wouldn't otherwise have to act alone. Well, one of the criticisms and one of the questions I have also is when people are using Twitter as a barometer, are they really talking about what's happening on the street? Or are they just happening to talk about a very limited segment, which is kind of what we talked about already. People who are young, people who have access to technology, people who live in certain parts of the world. So I think one of the dangers of looking at social technology as a revolutionary thing is realizing that it is, in its very nature, limited to a certain segment of the population. Okay, so easier to get going, but harder to stop. That's one way to look at what happens with social technology. Who gets to decide what's right? What is the role of police and people who want to censor what's happening on social media? What about civil liberties? Is social technology a new kind of what we call slacktivism? When you say, I liked the page for the Arab Spring, does that mean I supported it? Or am I really? Is it slacktivism? Is it a good way to call social corporations to effect and mobilize for real corporate change? Those are some questions, and I know I just threw a lot of examples at you, but pick up any one of the above you'd like to start with, and let's keep our conversation going.
Right. All right, so we'll proceed to that needs to be turned down. Can you turn it down a bit? Okay. Right. It's a little too loud. Right. So I'll be taking the roving mic around to whoever wants to speak, and I'll try to keep the discussion organized a bit so that people who want to come in on the same topic as the previous speaker will be given priority over others who want to change the topic. All right. So, who would like to go first? Oh, I see Ray over there. He's got something to say. I bet he's got something nasty to say. But
I just wanted to elaborate a bit on that question you raised on what might be called trivial or personal uses of the technology. It seems to me it's really important to distinguish whether some person is using social media simply for their own personal individual gain, like that gal who wanted to find her cell phone, or whether you're using it to the purpose of the betterment of the community, the society. Like I would consider the use of it for personal advantages really rather irrelevant. And if it's going to be seen as a progressive contributor to the betterment of humankind, then you're dealing with social community use of it.
No, I agree with that.
okay. Right.
I would like to raise the point that in some way there is absolutely nothing wrong with the media. The problem is, how do you raise awareness? I can get in contact with 5% of the people that I already get in contact with, but how do I educate the other 90% that are out there and that they are not going to pick up on my message because they're not on my blog or they're not on my whatever. And I think this is one of the probably the most we say imaginative. We imagine that we can make a difference using the new media, and we get lulled into this idea that something is going to happen simply because I blog or something else. But in fact, I'm not making any changes in a concrete sense. And the only change is going to come about if I happen to contact with some people that already share my idea. So I would, in some way, agree with the Arab Rising was not created by the media, but it was there to start with, and somebody happened to connect it to the media. What do you think?
Yeah, you know what's interesting about that, something I didn't get to because I didn't want to overload with too much info, but there in that book that I just read, he talks about different levels of group activity. And kind of what you're saying, some of it depends. I think that's one of the power of social media, is you can reach people that are outside your group. If I start a group called Occupy Edmonton, anyone can join. I can join the Occupy Wall Street group. You reach outside of your circle. But no, wait a minute. Here's another point that's raised. There are different kinds of action raised by social media. And I agree what you said. If I'm just blogging about it, that's what I called slacktivism. You think I posted a blog, so I'm taking part in this. And you really haven't done anything to make change. But what this Shirky points out in his book is there's different levels of social, and I think it's important that we note these. The first level is simply sharing. You throw something up on a blog and somebody can look at it or somebody cannot look at it. Nothing really happens. Then you come down a few levels to cooperation. That's when you try to develop something like a group identity. And that's what I'm talking about, like where there's a Facebook group of people who are all interested in the Occupy movement. But the highest level that is still possible using social media is when you actually move to collective action. When you go beyond just, I'm going to just throw this up on Facebook and write, wow, it's really too bad what children in the Dominican suffer. That's nothing. But if you move through these layers of social media, when you're actually getting real flesh and blood people to go occupy Edmonton and come together and meet in a real place at a real time, face to face, that is a higher level of group action that he talks about in this thing. And I think you're right. There are lower levels of action that really don't do anything. And I think you have to move down those levels till things really start to happen.
I agree with you in the sense that they're at different level. But my point is, how do I get to move from one level to the other? Because say, I don't know, I put up a blog that I'm a new fascist. And only new fascists are going to come and look at it, right? How do I reach out so that I can make it happening on a wider scale? And I think we delude ourselves by simply putting a poster up. I mean, it's the same thing they used to do in the villages, right? They put a poster up on the wall, and everybody that went by said, oh, you know, on the 5th of December there is a meeting, right? But unless you get in and you see it, and the other thing, you have to catch the curiosity. Like, you know, I'm not interested in computers, so I'm not going to look at it.
Right.
Or I'm interested in horse shows, so I won't look at political debate. And so on. Did you make my
I know
point?
exactly what you mean. And this is, if I could answer this question, I think I'd be very wealthy right now. Because the question is, how do you make something, and the quote is, go viral? Why did national news media pick up a story about a girl who lost her cell phone? How did that happen? Whereas someone else who's trying, I mean, it's like we don't know what makes something go viral. I don't know. I mean, there's funny cat videos that go viral. But on the other hand, you look at the Occupy movement, and that 1,300 cities in a couple of months, that's gaining massive amounts of steam. And that's at a different level. But what makes that get paid attention to and not your post about, you know, being a neo-fascist or whatever? I don't know. And that's one of the powers of this tool, but it's also completely unpredictable. And I think that's both a power and a danger of it.
Anybody else want to speak to that particular topic?
I'm a great fan of the new social media, and because I am, I've tried to, in a sense, work out for myself what are its limitations and its shortcomings, particularly if we're interested in seeing how it relates to potential for radical social change. And to cut a long story short, I see, to start with, a big difference between the use of the mass media for someone like Barack Obama for what I would call establishment politics. Because for the most part, that kind of use of the media very much represents the same uses by corporations. It induces a kind of spectator sport, which you can tick off the box, yes, we can, yes, I will support you, and send financial donations, which is really what Obama was mostly interested in. But in terms of engaging people in hard-won, hard-fought situations, I don't think that's a particularly good example. On the other hand, when we look at the relation of social media to attempts to advance campaigns for serious social change, and if we're talking about the Arab Spring, then we are talking about very serious conditions where you're up against an army which is capable of sniping you and killing you and things like that. And when I think of that, I see the social media, to a certain extent, as being invaluable as a source of communication, as a source of information. Although I think your point is very important, that Western journalists have tended to vastly overestimate the importance of the media in countries where only a small fraction of the population actually employed it. And of course, in Syria, in places like Syria, after they cut off the internet, they decided to switch it back on because they realized it had valuable surveillance capabilities as well. But this is what I will end. I don't want to keep going here for too long, but there is a lot of research from a variety of different sources which emphasizes the importance of what I would call primary group face-to-face relationships. And a lot of this research is military. For example, we know that on the front line in combat situations, most soldiers couldn't give a shit about patriotism, about fighting for freedom, the global war. The only thing they're concerned with is the safety of their bodies. That's all it's about in a combat situation. And it's also rather like that from the research I'm familiar with in terms of campaigns, dangerous campaigns for social change. We know long before the internet, the research on the civil rights movement, on the going to the sit down at the counters and trying to desegregate some of these restaurants. If we examined the number of people who kind of withdrew from those campaigns and compared them to those who actually stayed under tremendous duress with the Ku Klux Klan and all of that stuff, it was very much determined by those who stayed had formed very strong primary group relations with each other. Before they came into the movement, they already knew people, often family members. And before the internet, of course, the sources of communication and information were natural communities, like churches. Like in the Deep South, it was churches that organized and mobilized people. Those were the flash mobs. And when Martin Luther King came down to Alabama, he already came to well-established communities, real life and blood communities, not virtual communities. So the danger in overestimating the role of the media, I think, is to believe that simply because people post on Facebook, and maybe even they show up in Wenceslas Square or Tahrir Square or these places, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to bond, they are going to form a structure which is capable of carrying through these things. That really depends upon the formation of primary group relations. I think social change is irreducible to that. So I guess, in a sense, that's one of my points, that one doesn't necessarily lead to the other. And if I was to ask one word, in a sense, to characterize all of this, and we've had various words, my word might be vicarious. Mm-hmm. That it's possible to kind of sympathize with all this stuff without really taking a step to participate and become active.
Yeah, you make some really good points. I just want to respond for a minute, because that's one of the questions I guess I have that I didn't raise, is I think it's been demonstrated the power of social media to create movements. Like you described, all the people who show up in the square. But then where does that continue when the work of forming a government comes? I mean, everybody's like, yeah, let's go to the square. Yeah, but where is the long-term ability to sustain? And I think that's a key point, which has yet to be, I mean, we don't know, right? In some of these governments they're still trying to be created, and, you know, it's great when everyone shows up in the square, but then who's going to be the ones who actually do the work? And then the second question I wanted to bring up, which I think is an important one, which a little bit we talked about a minute ago, the question about some of this social media is who's listening? And that depends very much, because maybe the only people who are listening to the Occupy argument on Twitter are the people who are like, go occupiers. Do you think the corporations are reading that going, oh my gosh, really? I'm the 1%? Should I do something about it? I mean, like, is it really making change? Are the people, you know, it forms a kind of group identity when people join together around an issue. But what I want to know is, who are the people you're trying to, the people who would be required to give something up, are they listening? The people who would have to share power, the people who would have to sacrifice something, are they listening to these social media things, or are you just preaching to the choir?
I'd like to suggest a small but possibly not unimportant change. And maybe I'll try to suggest it by this. I've been amused, and I bet a lot of people here have been, by the New York Times and Globe and Mail journalists standing very high over their word processors, trying to decide what is the significance of Occupy Wall Street, Occupy the 99% movements. And when they do that, they do it as we are all, to a degree, doing it in this room. trying to decide authoritatively. Right? So O'Leary for the CBC or whatever, these guys will write a column and they will advise us on what to take seriously in this. And the readers of those columns will be influenced to some degree by all of that. That's the old model. Now, there is a possibility, only that, but there is a possibility of a small change in that, which is that the social movement people, first of all, don't read those guys, and secondly, don't give a flying fart what they say or what they think. And I think, I thought that was suggested by your comments about the Obama campaign, because the effort now to hire, like, Obama's lost a whole lot of those people, the kids, right? And the next campaign is going to be very interesting. I think the next municipal campaigns next fall across Canada are going to be very interesting, because there's going to be everybody's going to use the media, but there's going to be a whole lot of old-style thinking gatekeepers wanting to be elected so they can tell people what to do. And there's going to be a whole lot of people, whether they get involved or not, I don't know, but there's going to be a whole lot of people who just don't care. Now, so when we go to your question about who decides what gets on, the answer is nobody. Because everybody.
You mean in social technology?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's potentially a very interesting thing, because it seems to me this society, in some cases, like very good ways, but not always good, our society is riddled with prestige and authority and gatekeepers. And the more that we move away from that, I think the better off we'll be. Now, whether that happens, can I use one example?
Sure. Yeah.
Several years ago, really, maybe 8 years ago, I taught a course at Augustana as a favor to a friend of mine. And what I did was I taught a course there that I teach here that I had 70 kids in the class. There were 13 people in the class. And I thought I was just going to rock and roll, like it was going to be. I like to do interactive classes, right? And I'm going to have so much fun. So I went down and I did this 3-hour class there. I had lots of material prepared, fortunately, because in 3 hours, not a single student spoke. Not one. I don't know, I think they were awestruck or something by me, or shy or something. The second week, not a single student. Those of you who've been in that situation know that is a very long 3 hours. It is a very slow death. The second class, actually, at the break, I was in the washroom, taking a pee, and this one student said one thing. It's the only thing he said all term. He said, I've got a blog. And he said something or other about it, and I didn't know what a blog was. Right. I'd never heard of blogs at that point. But about 5 days later, I thought, geez, I wonder, what is a blog? So I went to this thing he mentioned, and the blog was his notes on what was happening in the classroom. And turned out he really liked the class, right? What's more, he left the class, a bunch of them went to the bar and talked about the class. And he wrote up the arguments on the... So when I read that, I went from 0 to 60, from thinking I was a hideous failure to thinking it wasn't so bad. But mostly, it wasn't just that there was feedback. I look back on that, and I think there was a real shift. You had these kids who really were looking at me as though I was the authority and all of that stuff. Well, I'm trying to tell the stories. I hope it conveys what I really felt, that I started relying heavily on his blog to tell me what they were getting, what their interests were, and where we had to go next. Now, in that, I'm still a gatekeeper. You still have the traditional model. But I think we have the possibility now of something that is a whole lot more anarchic. And with that, it will be undiscriminating, it will be trivial, it will bypass face-to-face stuff, and above all, there is no incentive to encounter reasons in this stuff. But on the other hand, we also get rid of the people who never give reasons anyway and have all kinds of authorities. The teachers, the bosses, all that stuff. And I think that's great.
Yeah, well, you know what's interesting for me, I'll just make a point. I'm not a big person on Twitter. I mean, I joined it a while ago just because I wanted to see what it was, but I think I've tweeted 20 times, which apparently is a little bit shameful. So the person I was communicating with in the Occupy Edmonton has tweeted like 18,000 times, and I was a little bit ashamed. But what's interesting about it is I thought, well, let me just see how this works. And I've started typing in these subjects like Occupy Wall Street, hashtag, or whatever. And while what you're saying is very true, there's a lot of trivial stuff, but there's some really interesting stuff on there too that you don't hear in the mainstream media. So, I mean, I think what you're pointing to is definitely one perk. I mean, this is, it's open. It's anybody can say something or post a link to their blog or whatever. I mean, I think that's one plus, but you certainly get a different picture looking on the Twitter feed for Occupy Edmonton than you do in the Edmonton Journal. It's true. Yeah.
I thank you for your comments, Don. As I was thinking about the same thing about the corporate media, the established media. You know, it's a good thing that they're dying out because there's a lot of alternative media, what is called alternative media, but it's really great stuff. For example, antiwar.com, commondreams.com, Al Jazeera. The kind of viewpoints that you get on these sites are amazing, and they range from, you know, far right to far left, if you want to call that. It's just good to be able to read so many different kinds of points of view, you know. And for example, just one person talking about Obama. There's a guy called Glenn Greenwald.
Oh, yeah.
He is just a great guy. He's a constitutional lawyer, and he writes so well. And for the first time, his column on Al Jazeera as well, just the day before yesterday. And it's good to be able to see those kind of things because they make a lot of sense. You know, they're analyzing stuff, they're looking at stuff, and they're telling it like it is. Compared to, for example, people on the CBC or the, you know, CTV or whatever. These guys are old fogies. I'm sorry to say, but they're all white males, you know, to put it that way. And they're all, you know, they pass quickly. And, you know, the sooner they pass, I'll be happy. And I mean, you know, social media is, but I want to come back to what you said. How did social media get its name? For example, TV and telephones have been around for a long time, but what makes social media? Is it just a matter of because you can communicate with each other quickly?
You know, I don't know if I can answer that, but that's a really interesting question. I mean, you could argue that the Romans invented social media when they created roads to join their empire. I mean, you know, like you could argue that Genghis Khan, because he had these amazing horses, created social media because his horses could communicate with the far parts of the, you know, so I don't know where that term, it's certainly a widely used term now, social media or social technology. The only thing I can think is that people often look to Facebook as one of the early beginning social, you know, and because that was specifically created as he called it a social network. I think that's maybe where the term comes from, but I couldn't tell you for sure. I mean, his purpose in creating Facebook was to link people to social technology. Now, I don't know if you could call Twitter social technology. Maybe it is in the same way, but it's a puzzling term because I think the idea is that it brings things together. Sometimes it does, sometimes it stands in the way of bringing things together. So I don't know. It's a puzzling question.
There should be individual media or social media.
Then there should be like, this is my media. I think some people use it that way. It's all about me. Media.
We have somebody back here, right?
Well, that's a good point.
Well, just picking up on some of that, and on the, shall we say, the proto-social media, reminds me of the way in which literacy worked in the days when printing was a very new technology. And it didn't take off straight away. You don't really find this sort of thing in the 15th century, but in the 16th century, when it had been around for 50 years and people were learning how to use it, you discover a lot of little pamphlets. And Luther was really the first person to benefit from this. You could print a copy of his thesis fairly cheaply, and let's say you did it in Nuremberg, and then you sent it off to Augsburg or some other place, and somebody else could print some more, and then somebody in the pub could read it to people who perhaps were illiterate or who hadn't happened to encounter it, so that the impact of those fly sheets was much greater than appears on the surface. And it strikes me that when we talk about social media today, maybe only 4 or 5% of the people involved in the Arab Spring are tied in to the social media, but they have friends, they have family, and I suspect that once again the influence of the social media may be much greater than the apparent range of their participation.
That may be true.
So I could maybe leave you with those thoughts.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I mean, I wonder if you're using your example, Nick, that the same way that literacy developed and more people had access to these publications, social media literacy. I mean, when Facebook first, quote, started, I had nothing to do with it. And it's interesting for me, I was relatively early on Facebook for someone of my age. And it was about 3 years after I had been on it that suddenly then people my age started coming on. And then it's you know, the sort of access has spread little by little by little. And I think that may be something that we see happening with social technology as well. And you also, I think, just told me that maybe Martin Luther liked Facebook, or did I? Rock on. No, that's a great point, though.
Right.
You heard it here first.
I was a bit uncomfortable when you seemed to reflect a popular view that young people have completely turned off on unions and political parties. And I really believe that the way power is exercised in our society, that it's essential that more than pushing, clicking on the social media, we need people to be actively involved in political parties. I know from my involvement, which is to state my bias in the NDP, I see a fair number of young people who are really committed and they're working hard. And, I'm rambling here a bit, but Obama has lost a big proportion of those people who I turned on to him through the social media because the going got tough and there were problems. And by engaging in political parties, joining them, working on election campaigns and all of that, I think that demonstrates a long-term and deep commitment and a readiness to persevere. Over my adult life, I have participated in lots of demonstrations, protests, but I consider that by far more meaningful for me and more deeply rooted in me has been my participation through the party that I happen to favor. So I think that's what I meant when I used the word shall. I agree with you that the social media definitely are making an important contribution, but they need to be in the service of these traditional institutions, because that's how you get elected to power, is through political parties that are well organized and that use these tools.
Mm-hmm. I think you make an important point about what it means to have a long-term commitment and to persevere with something when the going gets tough, and that's the point I raised earlier about the governments. Like, who's going to stick around after the protest and set up these new governments? But here's another way to look at this, and maybe I'm really unfairly over-stereotyping, but isn't that I think we've come through a period, certainly when I was young, where apathy was the name of the game, where nobody gave a crap about anything in politics. It's the same old platitudes on both sides. Nobody's really... And so there was a generation of youth that were very disillusioned by politics, myself included. And so you could say, well, this is the first step. These, youth, hey, maybe they're only showing up for the rally, and then they're not sticking around when it gets hard. But guess what? They're showing up for the rally, which is more than they did 20 years ago when I was a kid. So maybe some of what you're looking for, the longer term commitment, maybe that will develop. I mean, maybe that's by nature part of being young, is being a little, you know, whatever, trying out different things and not sticking in it for the long term. Maybe that will come. I mean, maybe I'm being overly optimistic, but I do agree that that's a necessity, and you have to find ways to, you know, you can't just show up for a protest and never do anything else. But I'm encouraged that people are participating more. That might be my bias, but I do see that. Something's happening.
But that's what
Yeah.
what I'm saying is that these young people, I'm glad that they're really active in the social media, but they've got to take the next step and join these flesh and blood groups. Now, in Quebec, a lot of young people moved from using the social media to, well, joining the NDP and running as candidates and starting a kind of revolution around Leighton. So yeah.
It can happen, but you're looking for that more.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Anybody want to continue with that discussion?
This is interesting. I'm sorry, your name is?
That's right.
Raymond. And when you were talking about taking the step forward from social media into the party, I saw Dawn and the other guy up there shaking their heads, and I was agreeing with them, saying that it ain't going to happen. Because I think, for example, one of the things about the 99%, or especially the Occupy Wall Street movement, is that they realize a failure of electoral democracy. They realize that neither of these two parties care a damn about people. All they care about is getting to power and staying in power for as long as they can. And they're supported by all the big corporations. So why would they, take part or want to take part in that kind of politics?
To replace them, obviously, with the social democratic alternative. Who wants to? Well, I just said the reason for getting involved in politics would be to replace these two parties with a progressive social democratic government. And we have examples in different provinces, particularly Saskatchewan, of where there was some very progressive legislation that benefited the people as a whole that would never have come, or would never have come as soon as it did, if it had not been for people doing what I'm saying and getting behind a social democratic vision of the community.
But I think my point is still valid, and basically could summarize 90% don't give a damn. So you have the 1% on one side, you have the 90% that don't give a damn, and at the best, you're only going to catch 9%. In other words, the media itself is not the answer. If we want to reach people, I don't know how to do it yet, but you have to try something else. We cannot hide behind the media and say the media is going to do it, because the media is going to reach only the reachable. And I don't mean somebody just with the right technology, but I mean somebody with the right state of mind. In other words, we are not going to convince them through the media. We have to find some other way.
Like you said, that's a question I asked earlier. Who's listening? If the only people listening are the reachable, then...
Look here.
Yeah.
Do you see any corporate CEO? Like we are talking to ourselves, and we are not the one with the 1%, right? So how are we going to reach those people, basically? I don't know.
You're going to write nasty things about their corporation on Facebook.
It's not going to do it.
No, I know. In some cases it did, but I understand what you're saying.
I think we are kidding ourselves. And we are sort of taking the back seat, thinking that the media is going to do it for us.
Yeah.
A revolution was not started by electronic media.
Yeah.
I think you have people picking up an axe and going down and bashing somebody on the head.
Easy.
Have another cup of tea.
Make it green this time.
Chamomile?
I just have
I mean, that's extreme, right?
No, but I hear what you're saying.
think there's a shortage of good leaders.
Again, leader just happen, but you have to have a state of mind which we don't have. This is my point. Like, you cannot start changes unless you have people change to start with in their mind and be able to put their guts, their heart, and their brain and their money, if you want. What we're looking at this point is simply just, patting each other on the shoulder and say, yes, there is a movement out there, maybe one day it's going to do something. Well, I'm still waiting. They started 45 years ago, as far as I'm concerned. Nothing has happened.
Yeah. Okay. Just a really quick observation here. I think this is a very important issue, and it's, in my assessment, more important actually than the issue of social media. In my mind, there are two divisible topics of discussion. One is the role of social media as a form of communication and possibly mobilization. But the other, which is the thing we're addressing now, I think, is the relationship between a decentralized politic, a populist form of politics, the relationship of that to conventional establishment politics. And right now, that's one which interests me more than the social media, although there are clearly overlaps between these two areas. I think, for myself, the issue that we face with populist decentralized politics is far from new. It's very much reminiscent of when I grew up during the 1960s of the New Left. And when I first came over to this country, I was regarded by the New Left as an unreconstructed Stalinist. Which in fact, indeed, I was. Thanks for reminding me.
All right.
But my adventures in the New Left taught me some important lessons. I'm not quite sure what they all were completely, but it's worth, I think, remembering the discussions that we had then, because many of them are being repeated today. And of course, the New Left was very suspicious and dismissive of conventional politics, because conventional politics, particularly in the United States, had brought them into war in Vietnam, which was perceived as an immoral and an unjust war, which is what it was. Corruption, Nixon, Johnson, no attendance to the black ghettos, to the poverty and social misery and all the rest of it. So the New Left, in a sense, resisted and rebelled against that. Did it actually produce a program? Did it produce a platform and a program of action? Well, to a certain extent it tried. The SDS even had what they called the Port Huron Declaration, which set out some of its more abstract aims and objectives. And other variations of the New Left and the SDS and other similar formations did the same thing. But when I come to try and sum up what were the wholesale cultural and political changes brought about by that generation, I'm kind of not able to make a very clear conclusion to that. I'm certainly not going to say, oh, it didn't do any good at all, because that would be untrue. It did bring about, I think, in its own way, a cultural revolution which led to the rise maybe of identity politics, contributed to the women's liberation movement, to gay, lesbian, transgender and animal rights and all sorts of other things. But in terms of its long-term strategy for political change, a lot of the people on the New Left, when they realized that there was no permanent structure for expressing their concern for social change, drifted off into the established political organizations. In fact, Rudy Duce talked about a long march through the institutions. He believed that the New Left activists could bring about change through embedding themselves in the old institutions. Now, some of that produced some good stuff, but some of that, I suppose, produced Tony Blair and New Labour and very regressive politics, which was at one time polished as though it was new. And even people like Danny Cohn-Bendit, Danny the Red, ended up by supporting the NATO interventions in Czechoslovakia. The Green movement did that as well. So I don't have any answers, but some of these questions has been rehearsed many times before, and if I am forced to make a conclusion from it, I think, although some of my anarchist friends would dismiss this, but I think it is important to struggle for new structures, for new political infrastructure, which is more democratic perhaps, which is more inclusive, more enlightened. But I don't think we can rely on the old structures, because history proves that they betray the causes and the ideals of those who fought so hard in the early days. We need new structures, and it requires a higher degree of centralization and division of labor. We have to attend to the normal principles of organization.
Makes me wonder. I mean, I think your point is right. A lot of the things you said are the same kinds of questions that are still being asked today when it comes to social media. It's like, is it bringing people together, or is it just sort of creating more confusion? Because what's the most common thing you hear about Occupy Wall Street? Well, what's their message? Well, I don't know. It's a little bit of this and the 99%, but it's also climate change, and it's also So there's that things that are anti-institution. How do they? I mean, you're talking about a massive change of new structures that are needed. So you can't. So the question is, until those are available, how do you try to work within structures, or do you make structures? And I mean, do anarchists have a group? These are questions. I mean, how do you advocate for such a massive overhaul while you're still kind of under that system? I mean, it's a huge question. I think an important one, but I don't have any answers either.
I want to press the point I was making, and I'll use a specific example. The reason why we have public health care is because for decades and decades, people like William Wordsworth, Coldwell, Douglas, and many, many others and their followers worked their asses off, traveling up and down this country, and as a result of their vision, a social democratic vision, a mindset was created in the public in which even a capitalistic party like the Liberals recognized they needed to act and to bring in a public health care system. And that's why I believe so strongly in people becoming active in that kind of a movement. There's a biblical doctrine, the doctrine of the remnant, the holy remnant, in which argues that it's always a remnant of passionate, committed people who have a vision and who persevere, and they are the ones responsible ultimately for bringing about change. And I think these are things we need to really be inspired by.
Where are they? Where are they?
Right.
Well, show me.
Anybody else on this? I must say, I wonder, and I'd like your opinion on this, Rebecca, about exactly what's going on in the 99% movement on the social media. I have this sort of imaginary vision of it, because I don't really know anything about it, that people are using the social media to discuss what they're upset about and what might be done about it, and what directions you could take, what causes to support, etc. In other words, I think what I imagine now, what I imagine is that people are searching for the vision that you talk about, Ray, and that's a process which has to occur first, right? I mean, because this is not an easy situation in which to come up with a vision. All right, am I just romanticizing this movement, or is there any truth to it whatsoever?
Okay, well, if you're romanticizing it, I think I might be too. But here's what I think might be happening. This might be, like I said, that quote from the book, the first inkling of everybody knows everybody knows. It's like, wow, there's other people out there who think the structures we have aren't serving us. There's a remnant out there. There's other people who are disillusioned, and whether that's with the 99% thing, it's like, well, this is getting some movement, so I'm going to throw my hat in the ring too. I mean, you may be right that people are kind of just jumping on the bandwagon for this. with whatever, pick an issue. But I do think, and maybe I'm romanticizing it also, I do think there's some sense of, oh, I'm not the only one. I'm not the only one who is over here and not one of these A or B options that we've been presented with. Like, I'm something else. So, I mean, maybe this is an early stage of this remnant of having a sense of group identity. At least you're not alone. At least, this is a first big left thing that's getting some attention. So let's all jump, like maybe that's kind of some of what's happening. A quote I didn't read you that I think might be applicable to this question is whether social media is a call to action or whether it's a distraction. Because if it's a distraction, then all these other things come in. Here's the quote. All the Twitter posting, texting, and Facebook wall posting is great for organizing and spreading a message of protest, but it can also spread a message of delay, confusion, or I don't have time for all this politics. Did you see what Lady Gaga was wearing? Because that's part of the issue. If you've got, the Edmonton-only protest has 684 followers, and if every one of them is putting their tweets about what they think it's about, is that going to just create confusion? What is this about? What is the message? Well, you got 684 people who are telling you what they think the message is. So there is a sense in which the same thing that we want to value in this, that sense of egalitarianism, can also be difficult to come up with what is our vision? What is our identity as a group? Where are we taking a stand? I don't know.
Yeah, but I think it is a necessary sort of process for people to go through. When you think about the populist movement in the United States, mainly in rural areas of the United States in the 19th century, I mean, it was, farmers and townspeople meeting together and hashing over what the hell was bothering them and what was wrong with the situation. And of course, there must have been tons of confusion, right? But gradually the thing came together and got behind the progressive movement, and you had William Jennings Bryan, and I mean, in the end, it didn't really transform American politics in the way that people intended it to, but it did eventually form into some sort of a vision. So I think it's a little hard, Ray, to criticize people at this stage for being in discussion mode and things being confused and there being no vision to commit to, but just a sense that something's gone horribly wrong. Right. Anybody else want to add to that?
This idea that the occupied movements don't have anything or are ragtag movement of this, that, and the other is not true. It's only comes across in the effing media, okay? In the corporate media. Seriously. If you look at a lot of other people who are writing about it, they've got their act together. And their act is that they've been shafted by the government and by the corporation. And I think what really comes to mind every time I read something is that the banking crisis, which brought down, a heck of a lot of people, so many people who are out of work, so many people are out of their homes. I think that's a real, drive behind this thing. And all the public money that went into supporting these banks, I think that makes it really worse. A lot of people are totally connected on that particular issue, so it's something, they know what's wrong. Yeah. They definitely know what's wrong. They may not know what they want, on the other hand, but they do know that they need a change in the system at the moment, because it's been shafting them. And it doesn't matter what president it is. People like Michael Moore, for example, he was being interviewed the other day, and he tried to, in fact, he had an appointment to be interviewed inside the New York Stock Exchange. And they wouldn't let him in. Simple, here are corporate media who are journalists who are supposed to get a pass to go anywhere. They wouldn't let him in. So then he had to have his interview done on the street. Now here is a guy, who's obviously well known for his work against the corporation, but yet, this is the U.S., this is not Egypt. Okay, so the whole place was like, fenced off. There are police everywhere. There's more police than demonstrators or occupiers in that place. What does that say about the U.S.? That's just a question.
Don, did you want to say something?
Well, just briefly.
And I think we'll have to take a break here.
Geez, I agree with everything you've said today, starting with Glenn Greenwald, who, Greenwald, it shows you the United States really is a free society, because otherwise Greenwald would be in jail, right? He's a young guy. He's a young guy. He's pro-Palestinian. He's gay. And he's a left libertarian. Right? Now, wait a minute, a left libertarian. But he's also a distinguished constitutional lawyer who's published a bunch of books. So, when people hear he's a left libertarian, they don't go, oh, that doesn't make sense. He can't stand for anything. They go, gee, what's that about? Right? But when they see these kids in Occupy Wall Street, and they don't know what the kids are up to, they say their aims are unclear. And it seems to me what's really going on there is, first of all, very few of these journalists have talked to those kids. Because if they'd talked to them, what they'd hear is, it's an unfair system. I ask you, how hard is that to understand? But it is hard to understand if you're a gatekeeper working for the Globe and Mail, that, a newspaper that is a sucking magazine. So, their idea of change is bringing the Winnipeg Jets back. So I agree overwhelmingly with what you say, which is of course, but mostly what I think Tony really nailed it when he said it would be most unfortunate if these movements didn't evolve into some form of political organizations. It would be naive to think that that's going to happen easily. It would be really naive to think that there will be just one of them. But on the other hand, I think it's also wrong to require or expect that they will find a natural home in any of the things which exist now. And I want just to leave you with one statistic that I ran across, I guess 2 years ago, that it really stunned me. I asked the honors students, the third and fourth year honors students in political science after the last provincial election. No, I didn't ask them how they voted. I asked them how many of them voted. It was just over 40%. I was appalled. So I asked them why, and I asked them to, and I made no bones about my disagreement with it. And I have to tell you, Ray, if you'd been in that conversation, they give you a hard time. I mean, they really do. They say very clearly what they care about, and they say, where do I find a home for those things? And without endorsing that point of view, I do want to say I've come to have a lot of sympathy for that, and a lot of concern about it, for that disengagement from the current institutions.
Were they caring, when they answered that, were they caring mostly about their ambitions for their personal life, or were they caring about the kind of world and society?
Healthcare, the environment, whether they have a future, poverty, the treatment of people who are rendered invisible. Like person after person said, the things that matter are rendered invisible by the political process. We have no real future unless we want to fit in. Person after person after person said that. Now, I think you can agree with where we come from politically. They may be wrong in thinking that, but they're not wrong to have that as a concern.
The one thing that really troubles me with people is they dismiss all political parties as kind of in a global way as equally hopeless. And
not equally,
well,
but all.
Yes.
I think that's my view.
All right. I think with those notes of disagreement, we can take a break here for about 15 minutes and then come back for a wrap-up discussion. So be sure to refresh your teas here at the counter. To ask Rebecca a question, which might lead into a new aspect of this whole topic.
Rebecca. This is just a curiosity of mine. With these various forms of social media and the way in which this functions for the young.
Oh, then you shouldn't ask me.
You know all about this.
You're a kid.
I'm a kid? Oh, thank you. 41. Woo!
You know, it seems to me human beings only have so much energy. And when you are engaged in Facebook and tweets and all of this sort of thing, I'm wondering, does this absorb, does this take away, does it use up the energy a person has so that they don't participate in face-to-face engagement, they don't participate in organizations such as Ray was talking about? Does it absorb energy in that fashion and lead to, well, I use the word discarnate. Does it lead to a less incarnate life? How do you see this?
I can no more answer that question than I can speak for the young, and not just because I'm not young, but because I think the answer to that question depends on the person. I think that's true for any kind of technology. You could ask the same question about television. Does television necessarily lead to a discarnate life? I think it's certainly possible that it can. I think it's the same for Facebook. Do I think it's necessarily true? No, I don't. I do think, I know Jenny was talking about this at her cafe a couple weeks ago, about our capacity to be attentive to things and to commit to things and choosing where to spend the energy and the focus that we have. And certainly, if you're looking for an escape from real life interaction with human beings face to face, there's more than enough on the internet, including Facebook and Twitter and whatever else, for you to find that escape. And I think for some people, absolutely, they might use that as a substitute for real interaction. And I mean, we're talking about politics today, not just personal. So, I mean, I think that could point to some of the questions Ray was saying about not being willing to commit long term and over the long haul and face to face. But I don't think that's necessarily true, because I know as many young people who use Facebook merely as a tool to arrange face-to-face meetings. There are social technologies such as Meetup, I think it's just meetup.com, whose whole purpose is to arrange face-to-face meetings. So I don't think it's a necessary condition that it has to be discarnate. I think if someone is looking to escape or withdraw, then they'll certainly find more than enough there to distract them. And, you know, that's all. I guess that's all I can say.
Anybody else want to come in on this particular topic? It does strike me that, you know, when I think about how political discussion would have taken place in the 19th century around shop fronts and town centers, on the street, etc., that it's so much easier to end your connection, so to speak, if all you're doing is communicating over an electronic medium, than it is if you're standing face to face with another group of 5 or 6 people. I mean, again, it's this problem which came up last time with Jenny's talk, that you're taking something out of context, right? You're losing the context. you're losing the context of actually having to face people's scowls and people's handshakes and you know, saying, let's go, I'll buy you a drink. I mean, and all of that is harder to extract yourself from. It's harder to use that as a distraction than it would be electronic media.
But keep in mind those levels I mentioned of group collaboration on social technology. And the first one is, I think, what you're describing, but the last one is real face-to-face conversation. So I guess I just want us to not set up this dichotomy of either you're on Facebook and only online, or you're a real person, because I don't think that's a fair dichotomy when it comes to these tools. Because I think you're right. It's much harder to hit quit when you're sitting at a table with real people than it is online. But I also think that there are people who use social technology for those real life encounters, and they do see the scowls, and they do see the, you know, those things you mentioned.
Yeah, well, I guess that's been the case with this 99% movement.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if it was actually engineered through social media, it engineered something which was face-to-face.
And certainly was not discarnate. There's people sitting there right now.
Okay. All right. Yes. Okay. Over to Don.
I don't know whether you guys saw the journal today, but did you see it?
I did, but I don't know what
there's an interesting column, like one of the fluff columns, that I can't believe I read this, so
okay.
I shouldn't even admit
we accept
that I
you
did.
anyway, Don.
But it seemed to be tests that the first date is and isn't working.
I didn't see that.
So they list like a bunch of things where you can tell this first date is going to go anywhere or not, right? And one of the things they said is like, it's not a bad first date if she doesn't read her text messages in your presence more than 3 times an hour.
All right, then.
I would be devastated by that.
And I also just want to throw a wrench into the whole youth thing. I have a 15-year-old daughter who has no interest in having, I mean, she didn't even want a cell phone. She doesn't know how to text. I mean, I just want to say, let's not lump all youth in the same thing, because she could care less. I mean, she's not. Anyway.
I actually only said that because I wanted to get the microphone to correct you on something you said that was mistaken. You said it twice. Right?
Oh,
yeah. You are
me.
young.
I am young.
Yeah, from where I am, you are a young woman.
Woo! I know, that's why I think I always get tapped to do the social technology, because I'm young, and I'm like, really, I'm not. I should be the last person speaking for Facebook.
We'll get you to do wild sex next year.
Oh, thanks. Thanks, Don. Appreciate that.
Rebecca, you're not only young, but you're the only woman in a totally male audience today.
Is it? Oh, no, I'm not. Look behind you.
Only one, yeah, normally it's quite a mix.
Yeah.
Today it's like...
You know, that's why I feel so, that's why I feel so oppressed. I am the 1%.
But carrying on,
We are the 1%.
but continuing with what David asked, I want to ask you, you know, you see a lot of people on their cell phones all the time, everywhere. What do you attribute that to? Is it like loneliness on their part or what?
Well, I mean, I don't know. You're asking me to read the minds of people. I have no idea. Here's some guesses. I think it would be very easy to attribute that to, let me give you the stereotypes on both sides. On one side, youth have the inability to pay attention for more than 10 seconds, and so they have to constantly distract themselves with something else. They are unable to focus on one concept or one idea without being visually entertained on a regular basis. That's one side. The other side, someone's mom is in the hospital, and they're waiting for their dad to email whether she's going to die, and that's why they're checking their phone. I don't know why people check their phones all the time. I'm sure there's a little bit of both. I think there is definitely, the last time I did this cafe talking about social technology, I asked, based on a book I had read, 2 questions, and I think these are worthy questions to ask about anything new or anything like a cell phone in your hand. And the questions are, what does this make possible? And I think in the case of the person who's waiting for news of whether, their parent is okay, that makes possible to find out instantly if that parent is okay. But what does it make impossible? That's the second question. And I think you could say that it makes impossible a kind of attentiveness to other things. If you're walking and, if say I'm checking my cell phone in Don's class, and he thinks I'm texting my boyfriend, and he's pissed because I'm not listening to his lecture, when in fact, I'm just giving Don crap. But when in fact I'm actually desperately trying to find, I'm just trying to problematize this a little. Because look, I'm a person, I will come clean, I will do my confession. I read a lot of books. I love the printed word. I love engaging with people face to face. And, ... I use Facebook. So I just don't think it's always as easy to make it either or. And why do people need to do that? I could give you a whole dissertation about our society and alienation and how we've lost the town square. The coffee shop is maybe the closest we have to a town square in our society. And maybe that is part of what people are looking for. I don't know.
I only have one question.
Yes.
Is that fundamentally important, if I'm not there, to know that my mother died at that instant? You see, if I really gave a shit about it, I would be there.
Well.
And if I don't give a shit, or I am away, say I'm in Timbuktu, it wouldn't make any difference anyway, would it?
No.
Because I would know that she's died, and I wouldn't be able to get anywhere near in a short period of time. So I could wait for a letter, a phone call, I could wait till I get home, and so on. So this idea of being connected instantly is again part of what I call the bullshit mythology.
I always wind up defending Facebook. I thought we were going to get away from that this time. I'm not like the poster child for Facebook. But I think what I said was a good point. What does it make impossible? What does it make possible? And what you're bringing up is, I could make the same argument for the telephone. Why not wait for the Pony Express rider to get out his horse and drive and tell you the news? I know that it's different, but I guess I just want us to not... This isn't a new question, even though it seems like one. Instant connectivity is new, but people thought the telephone meant instant connectivity. And, then it was, this phone is always ringing when I'm trying to get stuff done. And, and that was when it was stuck on the wall and it wasn't in your pocket.
You see, that's why we call you a young lady. When I first came to this country, I used to use aerogram.
Aerogram? I know an aerogram.
Okay, and they would take about a week to go one way. Then if they answer instantly, which wouldn't be the case because instant didn't make any difference, I would get an answer back, say, over 3 weeks, by which time I generally forgot what it was all about. When they invented the phone, not so much they invented it, but they made it cheaper. It was fantastic to be able to pick up the phone at the right time because you have to adjust and be able to converse. Now it's really fantastic. It cost me 4 cents a minute, and so I can talk. My mom has died, but I can talk to my sister, to my brother for a very long, extended period of time, and we could actually have a conversation. So instant. I guess, adjust depending on the technology you're using. But again, it's not fundamental. It doesn't make any difference in the relation that I have. The relation is much more important than the media I use.
Mm-hmm. I do love my mother.
I do have internet and I use it. But one thing I've struggled with, and which I've noticed, is... it's kind of an expectation that you answer quickly, and I'm not very good at that. Some days I forget to check it, and I get the feeling sometimes that I'm considered rude for not doing it, and that raises the whole issue of some policies of politeness or courtesy surrounding this, and I don't know I'm not up on that, I guess.
Well, there's a huge. I mean, here's a question for you as a pastor, former pastor. There are people like their pastor is on Facebook, and they're friends with their pastor, and they post, "My mom just died," and the pastor doesn't respond for a long time. Let's say 2 hours, because on Facebook you'd be like, you know, instant. Your friends, "Oh, I'm so sorry, blah blah, whatever. We are okay. Can I bring you something?" They would be annoyed at their pastor. So I mean, I understand what you're saying. Like, I don't know how I would negotiate that.
So really, I should be checking how frequently now should I be checking my emails?
Facebook? Or emails?
Emails.
At least several times a day.
Oh, I got a long ways to go.
I know, we didn't want to tell you, Ray, but... I'm just kidding.
Intrusive.
It is intrusive. I mean, that's, you know, there's a cost for sure. I'm not getting that.
Well, it does make a difference how frequently and how quickly these messages go. I'm thinking of a couple of instances. One was the invention of the telegraph, which made a big difference to diplomacy. I've heard it said that Lord Stratford de Redcliffe, at the time of the Crimean War, was the last diplomat who really made foreign policy because he couldn't communicate with Whitehall quickly enough to get decisions. But to go back just a little further, the way the Spanish-American Empire worked was that if you were sitting in Lima or someplace and you had a message for Madrid, it had to go up to Mexico, it had to get on the annual galleon and go to Spain, where they would then consider it, and they would send a reply back next year, and it would then have to get back to you in Lima. And in the meantime, of course, you were doing what you jolly well wanted to, and you had a kind of space for initiative and indeed, well, the story is that they would get the instruction at last, and they would say, "Obedisco, pero non complo." I obey, but I do not comply. So you couldn't do that now, and I'm not sure whether that's a good or a bad thing, but there was an area for autonomy there which is being wiped out.
Oh, there's still areas for autonomy. I don't have to turn on Facebook if I don't want to. No one's making me. People can think me rude and I can still choose not to respond. I mean, I don't know. I think there's still room for autonomy.
What about this whole concept of being defriended?
Well, David, I didn't want to tell you, but... David's not on Facebook. It's okay. What are you asking me?
I don't know. I'm not asking you anything. I just think it's a fascinating.
Well, and then there's all these. There's things that you can. You know, there's the biggest hoax that goes around on Facebook all the time is when there's a link to some sort of spam that promises to tell you who has unfriended you in the last, you know, whatever. It's like, oh, whatever. I don't care. I mean, I don't pay attention to who unfriends me. Well, I'm just gonna another like kind of related to what we're talking about. And it's related to this question of what does it make possible and what does it make impossible. I think it's a similar way of framing the same question. I think it's Roland Barthes in Mythologies says that these new cultural objects, you know, pick your object, they both mark something, they mark a difference, and they make a difference. So I think that kind of, to Nick's point about the role of the telegraph in diplomacy, that marked a need. The telegraph was developed based on some kind of perceived, whether it was accurate or not, need to know information sooner. And it wouldn't have been developed if someone didn't feel that need. So first it marks a kind of difference. It marks something that's needed. You might ask, why did social technology develop and take off the way it did, and with the generation it did, and has it spread since then? What need was out there that this met? I'm not going to answer that, But then it also makes a difference. After it has marked a difference, it makes a difference. And then suddenly, something that you have this perceived need for begins taking over, and you wonder where your autonomy goes. Am I still able to say no? Just say no to Facebook. I check my Facebook. But do I consider that has somehow diminished me as a person? Absolutely not. Do I think it's diminished my intellect or my ability to focus on an argument or relate to real human beings? I would say no. Is that true for everyone? Probably not. But I just think you have to be very careful about making wide generalizations when it comes to this stuff. Because I do think it marks a difference, and then it starts to make a difference. And that's an interesting thing to look at in our conversation today about politics. Why is this, what difference is this marking in the way the world is today? And then what difference is it making? And I think some of those questions are so new that we still don't know.
I'm going to interrupt here a bit. I'm going to try something a bit different, because we've been talking about young people and their uses of social technology. Well, actually, there are some young people here, and I'm going to ask them whether they use social technology and why they use it. Like, what is your name?
My name is Mandy. Hi, nice to meet everyone here. I would say yes, as young people, we do use social technology quite a lot. As you said, I do check my cell phone all the time. Well, for me, I'm coming from other country. Like, I'm here alone. All my parents and the family is overseas, back to China. So most of the time, when my mom needs me, she will phone me or email me, or she might just, web camera with me on my phone. Like, I can see her right away just on my phone and talk to her straight. And if I got something happen on me, like say if I'm sick or some sad thing happen on me, I would just phone my mom or face with her to tell her what's going on with me. And my mom would talk with me and make me feel happy or make me feel better. I would say that's efficient way for us to getting information or connect with a family or a friend back to my country. So yeah, obviously we're using a lot, not only for me, all my friends the same too.
And do you ever use this for political discussions?
Not really though. Not really, yeah.
This young gentleman.
What is your name, sir?
My name is Vance.
Friends?
Vance, yeah.
That's right. And do you use social tech?
Well, if I'm saying no, I'm lying to you, right?
I was like, yes, come on.
So yeah, I use it every day.
Right. What do you use? Facebook, Twitter?
Well, I use everything, like Facebook, Twitter, like including MSN, everything, like basically, yeah.
And what do you use it for,
mainly? It's for getting connection with my friend or my family. It's not like political purposes, but like mostly just like getting connected. That's it. Like making my network, making it bigger, right? Build up my networking.
How much time
do I spend?
Do you spend on it?
Well, it depends. So if I have time, mostly on average, a couple hours a day at least. Yeah.
And most of that time is spent sort of talking with your friends and family?
Well, I watch stuff from YouTube as well, right? That counts, right? So if only for connection purposes, probably just an hour or something. But surfing internet, going to YouTube, getting some news from the internet, they count for 2 to 3 hours a day, something like that.
Do you think that this interferes at all when you're having face-to-face?
Or face-to-face?
Encounters?
Well, I can feel the difference, right? Because mostly when you're talking to the machine, you're talking to no one, right? Even you are actually talking to somebody, it's
kind of different, because when you're talking to people face to face, you can feel the emotion, you can see their face, right? But when you're talking to machine, you just like seeing those characters coming up, you know. And mostly, the main difference is you don't have to respond right away. That's how I feel, right? Sometimes when you got a question, you can, wait a minute, I can think about it, right? You don't have to rush to answer that question. But when you're talking to people face to face, then you don't want to, you know, stuck there, you know. You see what I mean? Yeah, when you're talking to machine, it's kind of different. Yeah. Yeah? Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Okay.
Anybody else have a?
Anyone else? You want to?
No, nobody else. Right. Did anybody else want to ask these two young people a question?
I have a question for Rebecca.
Oh, you have a question? Rebecca. Would anybody have a question they'd like to ask that I didn't? Okay.
Thank you very much. Yes, no problem.
Thank you. That was very kind of you. Right. Okay.
Didn't know you get put on the spot.
Thank you. You mentioned the word fast, and I would like to hear you to address that. And I'm glad to hear that sometimes talking through a machine means that you have this luxury of slowing down time. You have the luxury of pondering on your responses. And I'm just wondering, since the days of the telegraph and the telephone, and I'm so happy for my young colleague over here, because when I was young, I have to handwrite a letter to send it to my mother in Hong Kong, and it takes 3 months to get there. It takes another 3 months to come back to receive some news from home. What about living life in the fast lane as such? Everything's compressed. Instead of having a conversation, say, over an hour, it's like two seconds on an email or Facebook or instantaneous blogging or tweeting. Or, just like to hear your comments about that. Are we heading, is it like a train wreck about to happen soon?
I don't know. That's an interesting question. In some of the things I read in preparing for this cafe today, they said that there is a small but growing number of people who are becoming sort of, I don't know what the right word is, but they're sort of over Facebook. Like, it's becoming too much. It's kind of too much stimulation, and I don't need to know that the person I sat next to in grade 5, her puppy threw up and she had to clean it up, or, you know, whatever. That's almost, we're talking about space and fast lane. I grew up in New York City, and when I grew up kind of at an interesting time, because when I still typed my college papers on a typewriter. And there was no email when I was in college. But right after me, my sister had email in college. So I'm kind of on this weird foot in both camps that I can see, you know, both sides of this. I think growing up in a city, I felt like I was in the fast lane without Facebook. I mean, you're just always, okay, get off everybody runs when they get off the ferry. I don't know why. I mean, you just do. Like, it's what you do. But there was something, I guess I'm getting more confessional now, but in myself, there was something that I was looking for that I didn't have. And so I took these modern poetry classes, and I said, I need to reconnect with nature. So I went and worked at Yellowstone National Park for a summer. And, because I wanted to be in the outdoors, I wanted to slow down. I think while the communication is faster, I mean, it's different when, what she was talking about, when you're FaceTime with somebody and you actually see them and you're talking. I think that's different than what Franz was saying about typing it. Those are two different things. When you've actually got the person on a live cam and you're talking, you can see their facial responses, you're responding, they're responding. I don't know that that's any... I mean, it's still different than talking face-to-face, but it has a lot more of the same qualities, where you're seeing the person's facial reaction and you're responding right away. I've had ongoing conversations on email or Facebook that become very frustrating, because while it's fast, it's not very deep. And if you want to talk about something, it's like you're answering each other in these short whatever, and you're never kind of, say, oh, let's just meet, because I can't keep email. It's too complicated to email everything that I'm thinking right now, unless my email becomes, really long. So I think it's the same question I asked before. What's possible? What's impossible? What's possible when things are fast is you can talk to your mom, and you're having a bad day, and right away she can cheer you up, or, send you some virtual chicken soup or whatever it is. What's impossible, I think the speed of it and the quantity of it can be overwhelming. It just depends. I'm not even sure that I'm the best person to ask that because like I said, I grew up with no internet. I mean, I can't, you know. And then one generation below me did. So it's kind of a different thing. And I don't know how they would view that because it's not too much stimulation. I just turn it on, turn it off, turn it on, you know, whatever. It's not, and my daughter would probably, I don't know what she would say, but I think something, yeah, I mean, I think something's maybe lost, but I don't think it's impossible to find either, the speed. I think when it comes to politics, the question about being fast is also the same question about it being easy. It's very easy to just bloop, put something up on Twitter and then go, uh-oh. And then, you know, you've heard stories about politicians that shared a YouTube video that had a racist, you know, thing in it or something, and they're, oh, I got in trouble. Or, you know, like fast can also mean careless. It just depends. I don't know if I'm answering your question. I guess I didn't know what your question was. I think there's a downside to fast. I mean, I talk fast, I do everything fast, because I grew up in New York, and I had nothing to do with the internet. I was born this way. There's a whole city of people like me. But that's a different kind of fast, I think, than what you're talking about with social technology. And I think there's pros and cons.
It's not so much the fastness which bothers me, it's the tendency to become over-connected. I mean...
Yeah. What do you mean by over-connected?
You're spending so much time just responding to people's immediate communications that it doesn't leave a great deal of time for just sitting down and thinking or reading a good book about the subject or something like that. Right?
I read lots of books.
I ride the bus a lot. A great deal, probably every day, because I sold my car several years ago. So I'm often with students, university students, high school, Scona and Old Scona, and I hear a lot of conversation. Well, one of the things, for example, is there'll be 3 or 4 that'll get on, friends, and they're not really talking so much to each other. They're all of them are texting.
Each other?
Yeah, no, I don't know. I wouldn't say that. But the other thing is, or I'll overhear cell phone conversations, and somebody's saying, "Well, we're just passing Tim Hortons here," and they keep talking inconsequentially, as far as that sounds to me. "Oh, we're in front of Hudson's now," and so forth. Like, it's such detail, and I don't know. I think there is that need to be not only in constant communication, not only instant, but also that constant communication. Like they always have to be relating. I don't know. But I'm not feeling critical, I'm just saying I'm observing this.
Yeah. Well, that's like people who use Foursquare to check in everywhere they go.
I notice it more so amongst high school than university students. They are more into this constant.
Maybe it gets old and they stop doing it.
Hi, I just wanted to question you. At one point you were talking, a need is generated. In fact, you used the word perceived need.
Uh-huh.
How much of this perceived need is something we've been sold to, and how much is actually there, that is a real need? And I think a lot of it is got to do with what we have been exposed to and what we've been we have adopted as a need, which is not really, it's just a figment of our imagination or a figment of the culture we are living in and publicity.
Yeah, well, I think that's probably true for many things. When you're born into a world that is constantly connected, of course you think that's a need. But I think the job, we're talking about a job.
Of course, it's not the right word.
Well, I think you would start to think it was. Now, whether it really is a need, I think is what you're asking.
Yeah.
But I think that's true of any young people in any society. You come to a certain age, you're given certain truths about the world, about assumptions, about the way things go, about here's what's, whatever. And then you come to a certain age and you start to look at those. And you say, well, is this a need? I mean, maybe you don't, but I think that's ideally that's what happens. Is you're born into this world that's this way, and oh, everybody's got phones, so I guess I need a phone, and then at some point, all young people look at what they were given and say, do I choose this? Do I need this? Do I, and do I think it's necessary? I don't know if I can answer that for everybody, but.
But again, I tend to think that part of being young is to reject what everybody has told you was the truth, or it was real, or
right.
At least that's the way I grew up.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
You were 15 and you didn't have a red shirt on, and you didn't agitate with Stalin like my friend was talking about. Or if you didn't like that, you could go to the neo-Nazi, or if you didn't like that, you could pick another position that was not accepted. That was fundamental with being young. You didn't accept the establishment.
Well, I think that's exactly what I'm saying, is you get to a certain age when you start to question and reject and whatever what you've been given. But I think your first, when you're younger, it depends on what age we're talking about. You become to a certain age and then you do question and reject and choose your own thing. But I think when you're younger than that, you don't know any different. This is the way the world is. And then you think, oh wait, there's a different way to do this. And then you see the options, and then you become self-reflexive and think about it. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know if it's any longer an option for people. I don't know. I mean, I think it's increasingly difficult to make the choice to not use social media.
Yeah, and I think the choice is much narrower.
I agree. There's a smaller range of choices that are available when it comes to using it or not using it.
I think I'll have to interrupt at that point. It's 3:30, just about, and our time to draw this to a halt. Listen, could we all give Rebecca a good hand for animating this discussion?
I'll email you my things.
Oh, okay, you can Facebook me, Don.
And also, let's give a hand to the staff at Steve's. To the young people. And then in 2 weeks' time, November 12th, we'll be having another cafe, this time on the subject of
what are the limits?
What are the limits to reasonable accommodation? The references, of course, to what went on in Quebec about the limitations on religious freedom. So that's what we'll be having next time. Hope to see you all again.